Hello and welcome to Straight to the Point. I'm your host, William J. Gibbs Jr. This is Coastal Bend Today, and my guest in studio right now is Corpus Christi Mayor Joe McComb, who just won re-election and will be formally sworn in. I believe it is January 7th, correct, Mayor? January the 8th. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Happy New Year to you, and hope you had a Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Same to you, sir. And now tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a Corpus Christi native, was born here in Memorial Hospital, and did all of my schooling here until I went to Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas, and then came back here and got in a family business that my father started in 1940, and after his passing, my mother, who was a school teacher, came in and took over the business. I just literally walked out of the classroom, got in the moving business, and that was in the mid-50s, before women's liberation, so a lady in the trucking business was pretty unusual. But she was, being a school teacher, she's very knowledgeable, she learned quickly, and she kept the business going, and then after she passed away, then I took over the family business in 1980, and have been running it ever since. And so far, it's still open and running. So I've made a lot of mistakes, but we're still open.
Well, you know, and that's important to have business acumen when going into running a large city such as this, I'm sure. So why don't you tell me a little bit about the first 100 days of the new term? What kind of things do you want to do?
Well, we want to really accelerate the search for a city manager. We've got a vacancy. We kind of got caught with the holidays, causing some delays and getting some advertisements out, and then I'm sure people wanting to be considered or considering applying between the holidays. They were off and they had their activities, and so we'll settle down here after the first of the year and move that process forward. We've already hired the search firm to go out, and they've published some notices for applications to be submitted, so I think those should be coming in quickly. And then we want to move as fast as we can on the city manager search to fill that position, because while Keith Selman is doing a yeoman's job now, when you've got the tag interim, there may be some hesitation on making some decisions versus other decisions. And so whether it's Mr. Selman that's the new city manager, or whether it's someone we pick through the selection process, which he is certainly eligible to apply for, then that person will, have that city manager designation and feel free, I think, to exercise the full extent of what the management has in terms of their authority to make decisions in terms of staffing and projects and priorities. And so we want to get that done as quickly as possible. And then we want to continue to move forward with implementing the bond programs that we passed in 2016 and 2018, implement some of those that we just passed in November of 2018. So we've got a lot going for us. 24 months goes rather quickly. So we've only got 2 new council members coming in. Everyone else has been on the council in the previous term. So we shouldn't miss a step moving forward. We've gotten some great things accomplished, but we've got some others that we want to get accomplished as quickly as we can.
So with regard to the status of the city manager search, when do you think the search firm will make a recommendation so that the council can select a finalist?
Well, we're hoping to get a list of potential candidates hopefully by the end of January. And because I'm not sure when they exactly sent the advertisement that the job has been posted, and then it gives them, I'm certainly probably 30 days to submit applications, and then the search firm does their whatever they do, interviewing, or either in person or over the telephone or conference call, however they do that. And then they'll submit a list to the council of 7, 8, 10 people that they consider to meet the qualifications that the council's looking for. Then the council's going to have a few days to go through those applications and say, well, I'd like to talk to this person, to this person, to this person, and then you make arrangements to have some interviews. So I would think it's going to be close to the end of January, sometime in February, before we really have a pool of applicants that we're beginning to consider and to communicate with. And then once we do that, I think we can move the process pretty fast.
So it's a very slow and deliberate process.
It is, and we want to get the right person. We feel Corpus Christi is a wonderful place, and we want to have the right person in position as city manager for the next, the future. And we've got some important things coming up. We got the police contract begins negotiations in 2019, and then the fire contract started in 2020. And we need to get those resolved as quickly as possible so we can move on to other things, because it has a big implication on our budget. And so we need to know where we're going. So we've got to have somebody in place, and then just keep the momentum moving forward.
So with regard to city managers, the last two city managers, water has been an issue for them.
Right.
As the city grows, what efforts are being undertaken to ensure, first of all, that there's enough water, that the sources are protected, finding new sources, and most of all for the end user, making sure that they're billed properly?
Well, water is an extremely important issue, and this council has been very aggressive. We have taken the steps, one, to make sure or try to prohibit any future requirements for water boils that we had in the past prior to our being on council. Second, everybody takes credit. Every time something good happens, the elected officials take credit. Well, our Lake Corpus Christi is 100% full right now. Choke Canyon's over 50% full. Lake Texana's, I think, is 100%. So while we don't have anything to do with it, we'll take credit for having a good, adequate water supply right now. But what we have taken steps is we've identified one source of future water, which really would be just an endless supply, and we're doing the site selection now, and they will begin to do the processing with the contract with Freeze and Nichols for the permitting of a desal plant. And industry has stepped up because they want an uninterruptible water supply also, because when you leave your office, you can flip a switch and come back the next day and flip a switch and have the lights come on. In industry, you just can't turn the switch off and on. You've got to keep running, and water is extremely important to them. And so effective October 1st of this year, industry started adding an additional, I want to say 25 cents to each 100 or to each 1,000 gallons of water that they are using to go into a fund that is going to be solely used and dedicated for the security or the securing of a future water supply. And whether that be a desal plant or whether we find a groundwater supply or a surface water, well, surface water is not going to be an answer for it because that's lakes and it evaporates, but a groundwater supply, a reuse of our wastewater, or a desal. But the desal really is the focus we're on, and the cost for desal in today's world is just about equal to what it's costing us to use our water supply and provide the water that we're doing now out of Lake Corpus Christi, out of Choke Canyon Lake, and combining with our Mary Roads pipelines out of Lake Texana. So we're taking every step we can and moving as quickly as possible. And I think within the next 12 to 18 months, you'll see a definite decision made on the direction that we're going to go and begin to do whatever it takes to acquire and guarantee that water supply. So without water, the city is stymied, and industry needs that water to continue to grow and provide jobs and expand our tax base. So we're focused on that, and I think we're going to have that identified. And we've quit talking, we've quit studying. We're now in the process of laying out our plan how we're going to get there.
And also on the subject of water, with regard to Lake Corpus Christi, the Wesley Seal Dam has been blamed for goodness knows how long of causing flooding conditions for residents on County Road 73 in San Patricio County. I know that the incoming judge has expressed interest in wanting to work with you and with incoming Judge Canales on trying to figure out a solution to a problem that has existed probably well since both of us were thought of. So at this time, what is the city's take on this?
Well, I don't think the dams caused any flooding. What causes flooding is when you have an exorbitant amount of rain all at one time in a very short period of time, because that would be the Nueces River that's coming down, and historically there are times there's not any water in the Nueces River, and really the only time it floods is when you have a huge rain event all at one time. So, but in the water management of the lake, obviously it's like if you're trying to let's say Lake Corpus Christi is a 5-pound bucket, and you're at 50%, and then all of a sudden you get a big rain event and you've got 100 pounds of water coming down, or 100 gallons of water coming down, and you've only got a 5-gallon bucket. Well, to try to minimize the flooding effect downstream, you lower the lake levels a little bit, because it's bigger than to keep it in the riverbed, to keep it from flooding the residents down. But sometimes the capacity of the lake is taken with so much water coming down, and you do have flooding downstream. It's a temporary thing. People know that it's going to happen. When you live on a river, you got to figure you're going to get flooded. That's why most of the folks out there's houses are on stilts and elevated. It's an inconvenient, but that's a choice they make. But we're trying to use our water management skills, and recently I think we've done an excellent job in these last occurrences where we've had so much rain this year that there was some minor flooding down there. I don't think the property obviously was 3 or 4 feet of water in the property, but to my knowledge there was no injuries or accidents to individuals, and then that water subsides just almost as quickly as it gets down there. But it is an inconvenient. But if you're going to live on a river that's subject to flooding under special conditions, that's just a part of the life that you've chosen to live. And FEMA has now prohibited really making any insurance coverage available for folks that do that. If they've done it once, okay, but if you continue to live in a floodplain, then why should their theory is, why should the taxpayers under the FEMA program continue to help rebuild property that you know is going to flood? The taxpayer, that you ought to have to be able to pay that on your own. So it's a gamble. People love to live on the waterfront, rivers and the bays and everything else, but the price you pay is you could be subject to flooding. But working with the county judge in Nueces County and San Patricio County and Corpus Christi, we are looking at trying to get a master drainage plan for the entire counties, because water doesn't pay any attention to boundary lines. And so there are floodings just because of our drainage situation, and so we're getting our lakes and our creeks and drainage ditches cleaned out, modified, enlarged to take large rain events. That's something that we all got an interest in.
So shifting gears a little bit, outside the region, in Austin, we're about to start another legislative session.
Right.
But a lot of the issues they're going to be talking about are germane to the region. Tell me a little bit about Corpus Christi's priorities in the upcoming legislative session.
Well, really, in broad terms, is that we want to be very supportive of any legislation that provides the city the opportunity to make the best decisions we can on behalf of the city. We want to be very aggressive in opposing any legislation that diminishes our authority to make the decisions. And there's a move afoot at the legislative level to take more and more control away from cities and move it up to Austin. And part of this is driven by everybody complaining about, your local taxes are too high. Well, the legislature, in my opinion, is pretty much a cause of many of the local taxes being as high as they are. And if you get your total tax bill, it's your school taxes that are probably twice as much, or 2.5 to 3 times as much, depending on the other taxing entities, as anybody else's taxes. And the legislature really has one responsibility, and that is to fund Texas education. But the way they've done it is they put it on the backs of the local taxpayers. so that the local taxpayers have to raise the money and send it all over the state, like what they call the Robin Hood plan, and the state fails to provide their level of funding, so the legislators up there can stand up and beat their chest that, it's your local taxes, we want more control. If they would devise a system, and I don't know how many times, you may know, I don't know how many times the legislature has been in the courts, and the court has told them that the funding system you have is not right, you need to fix it. They refuse to take the actions or dip into their rainy day funds or whatever they need to do to solve the problem. They keep putting it on the backs of the taxpayers. For instance, this last year, in the adoption of their budget, they mandated that in order to qualify for state funding from the local school levels, that they anticipated an increase in property taxes by as much as 14%. So, they're basically, and they use the word shall, it didn't say may, raise taxes by 14% over a 2-year period, over the biennium. So they basically said, if you want any state funds, then your taxes got to go up 7% one year or 6% one year to get to a combination of 14. But that makes it look like it's the local people raising the taxes, but it's mandated by the state. And that, they're wanting more and more decision-making at the state level. So we're going to try to oppose all of those issues up there that take authority away from the cities. And also, they want to say, well, we're going to lower how much of a tax increase you could possibly have. Well, that's fine if you're sitting there with pots full of money. But most cities like Corpus Christi and other, particularly your smaller areas, when you have a hurricane come through like we had in 17 with Harvey, and you need some money to do some repairs because everything that you get from insurance and from the federal government in terms of storm assistance is usually on a reimbursement basis, and that could take 2 to 3 to 5 years. But you got to get your bills fixed now. So there are times you're going to need to go in there and borrow some money, and which means you got to levy a tax or you got to raise some rates depending on whether they're COs or general fund bonds, general revenue bonds. So you've got to have that flexibility. The local people make the best decisions, and I think it's always been said, all politics is local. So that's something we're going to be very sensitive to is watching the legislatures to what they're doing to us locally in terms of restricting our authorities to make the day-to-day decision. Filling a pothole isn't a Democrat or Republican issue, or whether or not your bathroom drain works when you either pull the plug on the bathtub or your shower or you flush the commode. That really is not a Democrat or Republican issue. And I don't think they want phone calls complaining about potholes and the sewers not working in Austin, because you'll get no response from Austin, I can assure you. But those are the kinds of things that they're wanting to take away from us, the decisions that affect local people. And so we're going to be very aggressive and very vocal about that.
You mentioned an elephant in the room, Harvey. Mm-hmm. That has been, I don't know if it's been the elephant in the room, the albatross around the neck, whatever literary cliche you want to choose for this problem that you probably think about every day since it's happened. What is the status of the city being made whole again following Harvey, and what lessons has city government learned in the aftermath?
Well, Corpus Christi was very fortunate in then that we got a glancing blow of Harvey. We didn't get the full brunt of Harvey. But one, we were very responsive to particularly our surrounding neighbors in the Gulf Coast area and helping them. But two, for instance, right now I signed a letter, I guess on the 24th, Christmas Eve, to the state asking for an extension to file whatever paperwork it was to get some grants and funds to help in the restoration of some of the Harvey storm damage. So, that happened in August of 17, and here we're almost into 19 now. So it's a year and a half since the storm, and we're still trying to submit funds for grants for reimbursement or to help us in some of the damage. Some of these smaller towns, Port Aransas Pass, Rockport, they had huge problems, and they didn't have the resources either, the reserves, so they're having to wait for funding. So the storm may be in our rear view mirror, but the damage is still ahead of us and the repairs. And so It's a long process, and that goes back to this. You've got to have the ability locally to deal with those things, because we're having to apply to the state. They're administering some both state funds and federal funds for hurricane recovery, but it just takes time, and sometimes you don't realize the damages are done. I mean, we had some people, for instance, some of these condominiums on the island. After the storm, they went out there and looked, and they said, "Oh man, the buildings are all in place. Looks great." Well, they went inside and realized that the roof had gone off of the top of the condominiums, and water had come down all through the interior walls and everything else. So the facade looked good, but they got in there and found out all the interior walls were wet, the carpets were gone. By that time, some of the mold had started, so they're having to go out there and take them back to the framing. So sometimes you don't discover the damages right away, but I would think by this time most of the damages have been identified of hurricane related. It's just the process of getting it going. And so Harvey was a wake-up call for us and others. But I can tell you, in terms of preparation, our emergency management people, our first responders, and all of those, they had been practicing what you do to prepare for a storm, protecting people, protecting property, and we worked the plan, and they responded beautifully. We had no fatalities in Corpus Christi. I'm not even sure we had any major injuries in Corpus Christi. We did have some in the surrounding areas, but kept them to a minimum. But your number one responsibility is the protection of life. And we feel very good that we got through a hurricane, Category 4 hurricane, with no loss of life. So we're very proud of that, and that's a goal that we ought to shoot for every time.
Yes, sir. So with regard to life, a May Corpus Christi Caller Times article cited a 2018 point-in-time survey that said that the city counted 424 homeless, but that there were probably considerably more in a city of well over 300,000 people. First of all, why in a city where we've got economic prosperity brought about by the port and other developments is this missing that population? Second, what is the city doing in the interim to reach them? And third, what is your thought on this tiny house proposal that was brought about?
Well, one of the unfortunate things about many of the homeless is that they're homeless because they have psychological issues and medical issues. And a number of years ago, the state in its wisdom said, we don't want to keep these folks in institutions where we can, manage their medications, and so they've turned them out. Well, and many of them don't take their medicines on time, or they lose them, or whatever they do. And so they've got some issues that, they couldn't keep a job, or they can't keep a job because of their mental capacities. The county and the city and all are working together on a plan to try to address that a little quicker than we have in the past. But that's a problem that I'm not sure is going to go away. For the few that are out there, and there's some legitimate people that just have had bad luck, and we've got many opportunities for people that want. The Workforce Solutions has got job training programs, try to make word get out of these available sources. If they'll need to learn a skill, Del Mar College has some skill training. The Craft Training Center has some opportunities. But there's opportunities out there, but people have to take advantage of them. But I would suspect, and I don't know, I'm just grabbing a number out of the air, that a more than a majority of those folks on the homeless are there because they've got some mental and some physical issues that need to be dealt with. But they've got to want to help, and they got to want to seek help. We try to find them, get them the help, but if they don't maintain their medication or they skip out on doing some things, those are just some decisions. They continue to make bad choices, but you can't give up on them. I mean, they're folks like you and me. They for whatever reason, they need some help and we need to continue. We can't give up. But I'm not sure that, I'll be very honest, I'm not sure there's a solution to the problem. Because many of the, for instance, some of them, they could not, if they wanted to go get a job, you got to pass a drug test in order to get a job in industry. And if you can't pass a drug test, I don't care what kind of skills you have, you're not going to get a job. And that's people that are sitting in nice houses and everything too. If they've got if they think dealing with drugs is a good thing for their life, if they're looking for a job, they're wrong. Because you wouldn't want somebody out here running a refinery that's got a drug problem, or you wouldn't want to go to the hospital and have a doctor or a nurse dealing with you that's got a drug problem. And so that's a scourge on society that we've got to deal with on a daily basis. And there's a lot of good people out there that miss opportunities because they thought it'd be more fun to do drugs, and it catches up with you after a while. But the homeless population is a challenge. I think we're being aggressive as we can, but at the same time, I don't know that you're going to solve the whole problem like it is. And then, too, our weather and conditions down here make it appealable to particularly a lot of folks in other parts of the country to come down because we don't have the snow and the extreme cold during the winter times. And so, we can't do anything about that, but just deal with it when we have it. But it's a problem you can't ignore, but I don't know that there's a solution to solving the whole problem 100%.
With all the attention that I-37 is getting because of this Harvard Bridge project,
right?
A lot of people might wonder, okay, that's nice, but what about the street where my job is located? What about the street on which I live? I know that the city has a 2012 streets plan. What is the status of it?
Well, we're implementing residential street reconstruction and repairs every day. The voters voted in 2016 to they said increase our taxes by 2 cents a year for a couple of years till you get to a maximum of 6, to dedicate that money strictly for residential streets, and we implemented that 2 cents in this year's budget. We didn't do it last year because of Hurricane Harvey, but we did it this year because the voters approved it. Those monies are specifically dedicated to residential streets. The bond issues from 2016 and then the ones of 2018 were for collectors and arterial streets. That's your Santa Fe's, your Alamedas, your Galahards, your Webers, Everhart. All of those streets have been identified, and the voters approved by 60%. They want their streets fixed. Many of the streets in the 2018 bond election were pre-engineered in anticipation of the voters' support and approval, and we got that over 60% of the vote. So I think when we go back in our first meeting in January or shortly thereafter, we should see some agenda items with contracts to begin to expand and move forward some of those street projects that we just voted on, which will make the voters, I think, very happy. They don't have to wait 4 or 5 years to see a bond issue implemented. We're trying to move them as quickly as possible. If you drive around town, you're going to see a lot of construction. And, you've heard the saying that if you've ever seen sausage made, you probably wouldn't ever eat it. But, building streets and repairing streets is a messy process. It's an inconvenience both for the private businesses that you have to get access to. It sometimes is very devastating to some of those local businesses that their customers can't get to them. So we try to make it as less invasive as possible, but you've got to be able to get in there and get your streets built. But once they're done, and one of the reasons that many of the streets are taking longer than they normally would is that we're doing a combination of replacing the infrastructure that's underneath them, the water lines, the gas lines, the wastewater lines, the sewer lines, the drainage, the stormwater line. So it just takes time, but we're making progress. Many of the streets now are completed. Costoris is completed. Staples pretty much is finished out. The rest of it should be completed this year. And I think people, when all that construction equipment's gone, they're really going to appreciate the nice, good, smooth streets we've got. But it's an inconvenience through the process. But we're making progress.
And another job of government, as you know, is public safety.
Right.
And that's not an inexpensive task, and it's not an easy task. It was said by one of the candidates during the campaign that the city's staffing levels on police officers has not changed since the 1980s. First of all, is that true?
Well, I don't know whether they said it or not. The staffing levels are determined by the chief and the management, and I think the public safety, both fire and police, do a great job for our city. As a matter of fact, there was an article that came out September, October talking about Corpus Christi's substantial decrease in the amount of crime that's being committed in the city, and that's not because there's shortage of people, is because they're doing things smarter. We're using technology a lot better, and we've got Valero, for instance, this last year gave us, I don't know whether you've seen it, one of these surveillance towers that they can park in the shopping mall parking lots that have cameras all over them, and they can view the whole parking lot, see if people are doing mischief or breaking into people's cars and this sort of thing. And there's an officer in the tower watching the cameras, and then there's officers on the ground that if he needs to radio to somebody if they see some vandalism going on or something. So we're working smarter. People are beginning to be more aggressive in terms of reporting things that they're seeing them. Today's with cell phones and video cameras, they can assist the local law enforcement to apprehend people that need it. Security systems all over. So we're working smarter. They do a good job, and it's the programs you implement, not necessarily the volume of people. But for instance, when in the State of the City address that I gave last year, I made the comment that 92% of the general fund money that goes to pay for all of the things in the general fund, your fire, police, your parks, your swimming pools, your museums, and all of these sorts of stuff, 92 cents out of every 100 pennies, 92% of every dollar goes to meet public safety. And that doesn't give you much for senior community programs, swimming pools, parks and recreation, anything else. So we've got to be cognizant of the impact that has and what we do for our budget. So we're going to look and see how we might be able to improve that, because nobody wants to close down parks, nobody wants to close down museums, nobody wants to close swimming pools, but you've only got so much money. And the crime control district, when it first started, a portion of the crime control district money went to pay for additional police officers, and then they had several other programs, some night courts or juvenile courts or some type of educational programs or something. But over time, all of those programs have been eliminated, and the only thing now that the crime control district is paying for is additional police officers. And so if you're not careful, if you keep the trend up that we're on right now, the only thing the general fund money will be paying for is police and fire officers, and nothing else. And I don't think you want a city that's just simply a police and fire department. You've got to have these other amenities. So there's got to be a balance. And I think working together, we're going to get there.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you for coming by today, and thank you for joining us on Straight to the Point. I'm your host, William J. Gibbs, Jr. If you liked what you saw, click like, tell your friends about us here at Coastal Bend Today, and remember to continue watching us here on Coastal Bend Today to tell us what you would like to see on Straight to the Point. Again, I am William J. Gibbs, Jr. Have a great day.